All right. Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the Week 11 edition of the Football Diehards DFS show. We're coming to you a little bit differently tonight and for the future, so we're really happy to present our show to you this way. My name is Jamie Calandro. You can find me on Twitter at JAC3600, excuse me. And I am joined, as always, by my co-host, the fabulous Eric Romoff at Fantasy Nav. Eric and I are, I think, both getting back from a very hectic day and a hectic week. So this is a nice way to, cap off the week here for everybody and take you through some DFS and hopefully win you some money. Eric, how's it going today?
It's going well. I'm like you said, it's been a whirlwind of a day. So happy to be able to put the real world aside and comb through what looks to be a pretty exciting slate.
Yeah, I agree. As the hours were piling up at the day job this week, I was, getting more and more exhausted, but at the same time looking forward to the fantasy football weekend that we get to do here every week. And we're joined by Bob Harris in the chat. And Bob and Mike do the Football Diehards show on SiriusXM Fantasy and SiriusXM NFL Radio. Go over check that out. They do a great job. They'll help you win as well. I'll be jumping on with Bob and Mike tomorrow at 10:20 Eastern for my regular DFS slot time. And then it's going to be Thanksgiving week, Eric. We got some football. We got this football on Thursday, football on Friday, Sunday, Monday. That's going to be a fun one if we can avoid the injuries. So, but on that note, before we get into the DFS, how affected were you by yesterday? We had everyone's was looking forward to that Bengals Ravens matchup, and then we lost both Mark Andrews and Joe Burrow for the season as a result.
Yeah, we can't have anything nice with Thursday night football, right? Like arguably one of the better matchups in recent memory, and of course, several marquee players either go out or go down for a period of time with injury. In terms of the actual outcome of the games and the game and the players that were impacted, I, knock on wood, largely dodged some bullets. But we are coming up on the trade deadline in my dynasty league of record, and there were several deals both that I was involved in and that other people were actively negotiating that completely evaporated on the basis of this. Right, there was a team that thought they were competing that had Joe Burrow in the Superflex league, and all of a sudden they're now probably looking at a future window. There are teams that thought that they didn't have the horses to keep up with that team, and now they think they might actually have a championship window opening, right? So it was wild, right? There were several deals that almost got over the hump. There were several people that had just made deals with players involved in mind. While it wasn't the direct fantasy impact of the game that was being played, it definitely had a ripple effect through our trade market, if nothing else.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean such far-reaching effects too. And if you're look around your league, try and take advantage of this as far as fantasy goes. I mean, I got a couple of questions on Twitter just this morning about the guy in my league is, one of the contenders, a top two team in the league, and just lost Burrow. And he's trying to kind of get ahead of that and send him a deal that Burrow ordinarily would not be worth in Dynasty, maybe as a panic move. So, take a look at that. You might get somebody to give you Burrow or Mark Andrews for less than what that person is worth in those leagues. So, be active if your trade deadlines still haven't happened. We're joined by Albert and Jeff, in addition to Bob in the chat, two of our favorites. Thanks for joining us. We really appreciate it. Any questions anyone has on this thing, DFS season long related, shoot them our way. We're going to answer as many as we can as we go through this DFS slate. And hopefully, like we said, we'll get you that money that you can blow on Black Friday shopping this coming Friday. Do you go Black Friday shopping, Eric?
Not a big Black Friday shopper, right? I've braved the crowds in a past life, right? But much more in a Cyber Monday kind of phase.
I know that's the best. My wife does. My wife goes every time. And the thing is, she always goes with we're going down to New York for Thanksgiving again, and she always goes with her best friend that we left behind there. It's like the only time they ever get to see each other. That once a year to go Black Friday shopping, but she can't this year. Her friend can't this year, so I offered to go because I've gotten out of it, and I said, all right, I'll tag along with you, but she said, I don't want you to see how much I spend, so maybe it's so I think she's
Yeah.
going to go with her sister solo, and I'll get out of it again. All right,
There you
but enough
go.
rhapsodizing here. We're going to get right down to it. Again, any questions, throw them in the chat, and we'll get right to it. We're going to get started with the quarterback position, as we always do, go position by position, and see what the best cash and GPP plays are. So at the top end, this is another one where we already had Joe Burrow and Lamar Jackson. We don't have Jalen Hurts and Patrick Mahomes face each other Monday night in one of the best games of the year. Hopefully, we won't lose them both to injuries. But on this slate, we have some interesting ones at the top. I'm not really looking at this top end for cash so much, but from 7,000 up, we've got Josh Allen, Tua, Justin Herbert, Dak, and CJ Stroud. I think in cash, if you have that extra money and you want to go up there, the bottom end of that is probably where I would lean. Stroud against the Cardinals at 7,000 looks like a fine option. And who would have thought, Eric, that at this point, week 11 in the 2023 season, we'd be talking about the Cardinals-Texans as the most exciting matchup on the main slate for football in the DFS week.
Yeah,
So
the marquee
who are
game,
you
right?
looking for? It's crazy, isn't it? Who are you looking for at the top end for your lineups here?
Yeah, it's a little rough up top, right? Like Josh Allen, I think he put up 12 points in that first game against the Jets to open the season. And the Jets just have lying in their wake elite quarterbacks that have not gotten anywhere near their ceiling pretty much every single week, right? So
Good
hard to
quarterbacks too.
feel comfortable, paying that price tag for someone in that situation. Tua, you worry a little bit about the game script. He really has to have pretty close to a ceiling game to pay off 7.7K. So, if you want to overload on the Miami side, he's fine, but he's not really a major priority onto himself. Really kind of like you alluded to, the three that are at the back end of this tier are the ones that are most interesting, right? Justin Herbert, despite leading several heroic scoring efforts over the course of his very young career, continues to lose. But he's fresh off of a 27-point outing where he was, absolutely electric. And, now he gets a Green Bay team that is kind of middle of the road against opposing quarterbacks. So he might be my favorite of this high tier. With Dak, worry about the game script. CJ, for me, the thing that gives me concern is really how popular I'm anticipating he'll be. He's not at the top right now, but he's drawing a fair amount of ownership. I think we'll see that start to continue to expand as we get closer to lineup locks. So 15-18% CJ Stroud is not really something that I think I can get behind, because despite how fantastic he's been over these last 2 weeks, he's also got plenty of 12 and 14-point outings in the weeks that preceded it, right? So you can't exactly pencil him in for these ceiling games on a week in and week out basis quite yet.
Yeah. And where was my thing here? I'm still kind of looking. I think you're right. He's right now. If I'm looking right at this thing, he's kind of projecting as just about the third highest rostered quarterback on this slate, behind a couple of mid-tier guys we'll get into. He is definitely one that I would look to in the full game stacks. I think there's everybody in this game you can kind of get excited about. And if you're using him as the quarterback in that full game stack, you can get a little bit, of leverage with how you stack him or how you come back with the Cardinals player. But moving on into this mid tier, and I'll post Albert's here, thoughts on Jared Goff this week. So we can start with that. He's not, to me, he's not one that I'm, again, kind of like Stroud, I'm not really looking to roster him in cash, even though it's a decent matchup. But the thing you got to always keep in mind with Goff is the Lions' home road splits are significant, and this is near the top of the highest total game of the week. The Lions are big favorites, but we're at 48 and a half right now. And I think the fact that Justin Fields is coming back and that Chicago's starting offensive line will be at full strength might be a shootout potential here. Are you into Jared Goff? I definitely am in GPP.
Yeah, to an extent, the game environment is interesting, right? I do think we see this one be a little bit more competitive than maybe the spread might allude to.
Mhm.
The issue with golf for me is like the scoring upside is just kind of capped, right? Like this Lions team wants to run the ball and specifically wants to run the ball when they're in scoring position, right? So like if he's going to score two or more touchdowns, every one of them is going to be longer than 20, 30 yards, right? Like once they get in close, they are no longer attempting to get the ball into the end zone. And he's a fine play because of that game environment, but if you're not going to have the scoring upside, it's really hard to hitch your wagon to that in a tournament context.
Yeah, I can see that side of it too for sure. I will throw in, I guess, as another counter argument to that the Bears are last in the league in sacks, and they've given up 20 passing touchdowns, which is the second most in the NFL. So, I mean, when you're thinking of the matchup there, you can definitely say that there is upside there. But you're right. I mean, we've seen now, especially since it looks like I'm going to be wrong on Jahmyr Gibbs this year. That
Mm.
opportunity he got with David Montgomery out, he's just kind of took a hold of it and he's not going to relinquish it. So we're in full committee mode with that. Both are very effective, kind of almost like the Dolphins were running earlier in the year with Mostert Nation. So I think you're right there. I think, they want to run the ball. They want to control the ball. They're still high flying, but those running backs are significant weapons. In this mid tier, as far as cash goes, this is kind of where I'm looking. Right now, it's looking as though Kyler Murray is the highest rostered quarterback on the slate in that same game. And I'm into it. I'm fine with it. They let him run. He had a six carries for 33 yards and a touchdown on the ground. He still dropped back 32 times to pass. Um, for the ceiling here that he has in a great matchup against Houston, who it seems to be in a shootout every week at 6,100, I'm really liking that for cash. I'm curious on your thoughts at GPP, but another one for cash I think is a smart play. If you want to go a little bit cheaper here, is Brock Purdy at 5,800, who it looks like is the second highest rostered quarterback. We saw last week when he's at full strength, he's a weapon. And he's really not priced for that, especially, Tampa Bay is a pass funnel defense. They just gave up that 470-yard, 5-touchdown game to the aforementioned Stroud. Under 6,000, I think Purdy is a great cash play here as well. What's your thoughts on this mid-tier quarterback and especially approaching those two in GPPs at high rostership?
Yeah, with Purdy, he's one that I think is much more of a cash play, right? Like, obviously he's coming off of this ceiling game. It's hard to project that for him week in and week out. And then you couple that with the rostership, and you're kind of painted into a quarter by rostering him. With Kyler Murray in particular, I do think he has a little bit more independent upside than Brock Purdy does. Had he gotten that 1 yard rushing score instead of Clayton Tune, I would have been looking at a number with a comma in it last week. So immediately came in and showed what he's capable of. I think he reached 20 plus miles an hour on that long run, right?
Yep.
Um, you know, by and large, like dissecting this slate, you're just gonna have to make an opinionated stance of, are you going to be in this Texans Cardinals game or not? And if you are, then you really have to find a number of different ways to get creative around some fairly popular players, right? So buyer beware. I guess to kind of take that in mind as you head in. If you're going to click the button on Kyler Murray's name, you're going to have to do some weird stuff with the rest of your build, which isn't the worst thing in the world, right? Looking elsewhere in the mid tier, there are only a couple of names that jump out to me. Sam Howell, the leading passer in the league, the leader in pass attempts in the league. He gets a New York Giants matchup that I find myself having to apologize to you on a weekly basis for mentioning, but is very favorable to opposing quarterbacks,
They should be
as
the ones
evidenced by
apologizing to me.
yeah, fair. But yeah, I mean, you go back to last week, right? Dak Prescott, he kind of gives you the model of, look, these lopsided games a lot of times become lopsided on the arm of the quarterback, right? So,
Yeah.
how 6.3K, he'll be in the player pool for sure. Justin Fields is someone that I have a fair amount of interest in. I think that we're going to see him largely overlooked. He's kind of in the middle of the pack in terms of projected rostership right now. Most people, kind of like we saw with Kyler last week, they tend to want to see it on the field before they're really willing to invest in it. So, that could open up a window of opportunity. And I mean, the type of scoring output that we saw in this Lions game last week isn't out of the realm of possibility in the Chicago game, right? So if you get the lower rostered option in Justin Fields, there's definitely some interest there. And then probably one of my favorite GPP plays in this entire tier is Trevor Lawrence. He's coming in largely overlooked, right? He's coming in off of a fairly rough game. He gets a divisional matchup against the Titans that in the past and throughout the course of this season have been a fairly tough defensive matchup overall, but are much more of a pass funnel type of defense, right? So we could definitely see Calvin Ridley, Christian Kirk either get behind this defense or break a tackle or two as Tennessee allows a fair amount of yards after the catch, and all of that would be to the benefit of Trevor Lawrence sitting at kind of like 2 to 4% rostership. So this is a game that I think can potentially go over its number. And obviously, Trevor Lawrence is still plenty talented despite some ups and downs over the course of this season.
Yeah, that's an interesting one too, because we're definitely seeing some popularity on his pass catchers. Evan Engram is vying for one of the most rostered tight ends this week. Christian Kirk, who you mentioned, is very popular and in my initial cash build at 6K. So it's funny that his quarterback isn't coming along with that. I think we said that last week about Kyler Murray in the same situation, and he came through with that. So I like that call a lot. Moving into the bottom tier a little bit, and we got a question from JK Mills here that we'll kind of parlay into this, and then we'll take the other questions I've seen on here. Thoughts on, I'm going to take this one, Eric, don't worry. Thoughts on DeVito this week. At 5,000, could he get to 15 points? So you can't play any Giants outside of Saquon Barkley, and he's very iffy to me. The thing that to remember here is that since Tommy DeVito became the quarterback, he's dropped back 67 times. They have a 57% completion rate. He's been sacked 13 times and he's thrown 3 picks. I understand that Washington has traded away their 2 top pass rushers, but it really doesn't matter for that. I would not play him. I would not play any Giants pass catchers along with him. Barkley is the only Giant worth considering on this team. And like I said, even he's really not. And that's, if you're I think if you're stacking Washington, like Eric was saying, and you want to come back with a Giant, you can do it with him. But no, DeVito is not a play for me. Do you have any differing thoughts on that?
No, I do not. 15 points is probably a little bit outside of his ceiling, right? So it's always tempting when you see these min price guys that are going to start and play the whole game. But I mean, so many things would have to go right for him to get to like 12 points. That you're just going to have several better options, and on the whole, I think the pricing on this slate's pretty manageable, right? So I don't think you need to go down that low to save a couple $100.
Yeah, I would say that too. And I'd even say, I mean, if you're in that range, like I don't like him anymore, but play Aiden O'Connell in that one.
Yeah.
I mean, they at least at least he has Devontae Adams and Josh Jacobs and a fairly okay offensive line. The Giants have none of that. So yeah, no, I'm not into DeVito at all. Um, so that's the core. Anyone else in the lower tier though that you are interested in? I think, like you said, I'm not really going there for anybody because I don't really think you need to. But any thoughts you have down there?
No, not really. The lower tier of quarterbacks this year feels like it's getting lower every single week. So there's some pretty rough situations. Once you get past this, kind of mid 5K range.
Yep, I would agree there. So we're kind of at least living up up from that mid 5K up, but um so we're willing to spend a little more on the quarterback position maybe than we would. But moving on to actually before we move on to the running back, let's get these other questions we saw in here. So I thought I saw, let me scroll back here. So here's a tight end question from Patrick Mafia, who's joining us. Thank you. David Njoku or Pat Fryermuth in the same game, unless I'm mistaken. Yeah, no, Pittsburgh against Cleveland. That's right. Oh God, I mean, that game's total, I think the last I saw is 33, 34, something along those lines. With the two defenses and Cleveland starting their rookie quarterback. I'll check my rankings while you're talking. I think I have Njoku a little bit higher than him. And we still don't know that Fryermuth is officially active unless I missed it. Who would you pick here of these two?
Yeah, that's really the thing to note. I haven't seen anything indicating that he is definitively in Fryermuth, so we'll have to watch this one. Even if he is in, it's in Joku by a hair. These are guys that are outside of the tight end one range in the rankings this week. I've got them at 14 and 16 respectively.
That's what I have too. I just looked.
Yeah. So, I mean, you're really with either of them, you're hoping for a touchdown. We've seen DTR come in and at least show a little bit of love to tight ends. While it was ill-placed and ineffective love, it was love nonetheless. So
Yeah.
that's what has Njoku up at all the way up at 14 as opposed to Fryermuth 16.
Yep, those are my numbers too. So I think we're in agreement there. But good luck. That's a tough game. That's a tough game in general to target. All right, moving on to the running back position. So let's quickly start all the way up at the top here. Christian McCaffrey is 9,200, and he's facing Tampa Bay, who gets beaten through the air and not on the ground. He is showing pretty significant rostership for that matchup here. Not as much as I saw earlier, actually. He's dropped a bit. What do you think of Christian McCaffrey? I mean, he's always in play, obviously, because of who he is, but is he someone that you're, kind of going out of your way to get this week or not?
Yeah, not a huge priority, right? The only thing of note there, I'm also seeing his rostership waning. I've got him down to like 11, 10.5% right now. If that falls any further, we're definitely in a territory where, a single digit CMC can break a slate wide open, right? So, one to track if he falls into that like 5 to 8% range, he could be someone that you prioritize as a way to just get some raw scoring and, get a little bit of an incremental gain on the fields.
Yeah. And if you're worried about the matchup, um, you know, kind of capping his ceiling. Just bear in mind that McCaffrey leads the NFL in rushing yards. He leads the NFL in rushing yards after contact, and he leads the NFL in receiving yards among running backs. So this is not somebody that you fade the ceiling based on matchup, for sure. So, yeah, play McCaffrey in GPP, and like Eric said, watch that ownership. How about other people at the top end here? I do like. I find myself a little bit in the mid tier again for cash, like I was last week, and it worked. I bubbled in. I was a winner last week, using some of the guys that I did, and that's with the Singletary fade, which almost got me out of there. But I do like Travis Etienne a good bit at 7,200. Again, this is kind of the same idea behind McCaffrey against the Bucks, that Titans matchup is imposing for run defense between the tackles, but there are very few, if any, running backs in the league that have Etienne's role right now. Even Tank Bigsby is getting phased out now. And Dearness Johnson seems to be the RB2 there. Neither one of them are a threat to Etienne. Do you like him this week?
Yeah, I do. Right. Among this kind of top tier of the position, he's slated to be one of the more popular. Right. But he's not at a, an unreasonable level. I see him around 11% right now. To your point about the Tennessee front, very stout, very difficult to run against, but as often the case, the counterpunch is throwing the ball to the running back out of the backfield. They've allowed the 5th most yards per reception to running backs this season. Travis Etienne is kind of good at that sort of thing. And now, as we're kind of talking through it, a very quick way to hedge that kind of somewhat high rostership is pairing him with his quarterback, right? Like, that pairing is generally overlooked. Trevor Lawrence is not expected to be popular as it is, so certainly a way to several ways to get some ETN exposure without having to go overboard in terms of the chalk picture, right?
Yeah, look at that trade too. We recently traded Eckler for Jefferson and Montgomery.
Oh wow,
that's quite a deal to swing, especially with
do.
Jefferson coming back. Yeah, I like that a lot. Speaking of Eckler, he's somebody I wrote up in the football Diehards cash article this week. Even though that was kind of a I have to write a top play up. I'm not really looking to him to cash at 8,600. I feel like in that range, I'd just get up to McCaffrey. But Eckler has to be someone to be considered in this, wouldn't you say, against Green Bay, who is more of a run funnel defense, especially with the Chargers wide receivers dropping like flies now.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. I've got Green Bay as 7th in points per game allowed to opposing running backs. I don't see Eckler being all that popular right now.
Yeah.
Most people tend to think of the pass game when they think about these superchargers. And while Austin Eckler is very, very much so involved in that, he's not really associated in that way. So, yeah, he's in a fine spot. 4.1 yards per carry, above average yards per reception is what Green Bay is offering up. So, that coupled with 8.6K, it makes sense why he's not popular, but he can certainly pay that off.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. As but we've seen today with the injury report that in addition to some of these guys that are out now for the Chargers, that Keenan Allen is questionable, Jalen Guyton is questionable. So I mean, it's conceivable that he's the wide receiver 1 on that team if there's any kind of limitations or if those guys are out or whatnot. So that's something to watch for as well. So kind of as we transition into the mid tier, I'm curious of your take right now on the Lions running game. We mentioned it before when talking about Jared Goff. We've got Jahmyr Gibbs at 7,000 and David Montgomery at 6,500. And we saw in Montgomery's return that Gibbs outsnapped him 38-25 and outtouched him 17-12. They both had great games. What's your take on this? The interesting thing here is I'm seeing is that Gibbs is not chalk, but he is showing a lot more rostership than Montgomery, even at 500 more. Is that appropriate? How are you treating this one? I'm kind of unsure actually right now.
I don't know if I would say appropriate, but not necessarily surprising, right?
Mm-hmm.
When you're planting your flag on the other side of the Jahmyr Gibbs hill, that there's public sentiment that really want this kid to do well, and they want to believe that he is the lead back in this backfield. And then in the first game back with David Montgomery, he has a ceiling game, right? He still performs at or above a requisite level to pay off and justify a 7K price tag. So, you know, we know that DFS players love to chase last week's performance. So it's not terribly surprising that he's the more popular of the two. I see him around 10%. But appropriate is kind of a different question. Getting $500 savings, and more specifically, getting right now 3% roster David Montgomery in the exact same game script. Looking a little bit closer into the utilization. And a backfield that it looks like they are perfectly content splitting the workload. There's plenty of volume to go around. It's been there's been much made of the fact that David Montgomery gave Jahmyr Gibbs that goal line carry for his second touchdown. You tack on 6 more points to Montgomery's box score from last week, and he's right around RB5 in scoring, right? So, you're still getting tons of upside. You're getting salary relief. You're getting leverage on the field. Like if these rostership levels hold, David Montgomery is going to be a huge priority for me this week.
Yeah, I agree. And I was going to ask you about that little story about Montgomery kind of gifting the red zone carry to Gibbs, if you had seen that. I don't know if it's just me trying to still justify, the role that I wrote out for those guys early on. But I mean, it does seem like Montgomery was going to be the one to get the red zone carry again, which I still do think is going to be the case. Gibbs did out touch him, but a lot of that was through the air. I mean, they were pretty much 50-50 in the carries. So I'm with you on that one. I'm fine using either one. But if the rostership holds, I think Montgomery is the GPP play there.
Yeah,
for sure. All right. So moving down into this mid tier a little bit more, in the 6.2 or in the kind of 6K range, a little bit under. There's several guys that I'm into here. I definitely like Aaron Jones. It seems as though he's back, question mark. I mean, we thought that once already, and he wasn't. But he does have 41 touches over the last 2 weeks. So I'm going to trust the fact that he is back and is too cheap for that kind of a role. So I think he's a great cash play against the Chargers, who get gashed by the run every year and are again this year. I have to attack my own Giants team with Brian Robinson. He at 5,800, the game script and the fact that Antonio Gibson is likely going to sit. I think, is it official? I saw he was doubtful.
Doubtful is what I've seen so far as well.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think that, helps. I think that helps Robinson's 3-down role. He was featured in the passing game last week anyway. So I think that's a good idea to play him in some contests as well. And then going up a little bit more in that range is Breece Hall at 6,400. I think against Buffalo is a good play for cash too. And then, before I kick it over to you for some of your plays for GPP, Tony Pollard is still showing fairly decent rostership. I mean, he busted in a spot that he shouldn't have busted last week, and he gets arguably even better one this week. I don't know if going forward from this point on to the end of the season, the Carolina rush defense will be worse than the Giants, but it is right now. I mean, they've given up bottom 3 in pretty much every relevant category. So how are you approaching Pollard this week?
Man, I'm severely disappointed that Tony Pollard is projecting to be as popular as he is, right? It's not out of control by any means, but I thought this was going to be a guy coming off of that perfect environment last week where he just, completely laid an egg that would be in like the 5% or lower range, and in which case I would be all over him. This feels like kind of the high end range of where my exposure, where I'd be comfortable having my exposure, sort of around this 10% range. The environment is equally as fruitful this week as it was last week. Maybe a couple of those carries bounce out a little bit further, and we're talking about some longer touchdowns for him. The game script is definitely one that should set up for a Pollard type game. So, he'll be in the player pool. I'll probably be around this 10% range, but man, I was really hoping that I was going to be getting some leverage on the field with most people out of spite not clicking Pollard's name.
I thought so too. I wondered too, especially when I saw his price didn't really fall that far. It's
Yeah,
6,600 now. I'm trying to remember what it was last week. I can click on it. I think it was like 6,800 though, so it wasn't a really precipitous drop. Oh, 7,300. Never mind. I'm totally wrong on that. So a 700 drop. Man, that box score looks bad for him. He hasn't
yeah,
scored since week 1, so they gave it to him, though. I mean, obviously I watched that game as a Giants fan. They gave it to him. They tried to get him a touchdown, and he couldn't convert on it. So, I mean, if those keep coming, you have to wonder if positive touchdown regression is on the horizon here. Andrew, I thank you for this question in the chat on the DFS articles. I will definitely look into it and see if there's anything going on our end. If you want to do me a favor and just shoot me a DM on Twitter, just so I know I can make sure to get back to you if I don't get an answer on that before our shows here. Oh, Bob is here. They were all there. They were all there last week too. Thank you, Bob. Awesome. All right, so there we go. There's the answer to that question, and that's the answer I like seeing. All right, so we're going to move into the bottom tier. So Devin Singletary, $5,300. Dameon Pierce, despite practicing, has been ruled out again. I played Pierce the week before, and he chalk busted, and he went for 26 carries on 15 touches in that game. And then against Cincinnati, when I kind of left him alone, I don't know if you'd played him. He got 31 touches for 161 all-purpose yards and a touchdown. He was the overall RB2 on the week last week. He is mega chalk at the running back position this week. So I'm setting and forgetting it in cash. That's, I think this is chalk that you eat in cash, but what's your take on GPP at that kind of a rostership?
yeah. It's a tough spot from a rostership standpoint, right? It's not so high, at least where we sit on Friday night, that you can't work around it. But like I said before, like if you're gonna be invested in this Houston Arizona game, you're gonna be rostering some fairly chalky guys, right? So he catches the ball well enough. Pairing him with CJ Stroud is one way to mitigate against that.
Mm-hmm.
There's potential for some deeper Houston receivers to have a role to play this week. You can also pair him up there, although that's not the most natural kind of type of coupling, right? So, I mean, he's a fantastic play on merit. For me, I think if you're gonna click the button, it's probably indicative of kind of fading the rest of this game, right? Like kind of getting out of the passing game on either team and just having this be your exposure to it, and then going and investing in much more scarcely or scantily owned players elsewhere on the board.
Yeah, and I like that call too. And I'll point out too that we'll get to it in the receivers, but Noah Brown is out too, so that condenses that target thing in the Houston game as well. That's kind of the one for me, as far as cheapies go for cash. But any other ones you're looking at? You're looking to roster kind of in that sub 5,500 range in GPPs before we move to wide receiver.
Yeah, there are a couple of interesting spots here. Guys that are mispriced or overlooked a little bit. Right there, the kind of direct pivot off of Singletary from a price tag standpoint sits Jerome Ford, who largely will continue to see the majority of the volume. Yes, you have to deal with Kareem Hunt, getting some work in the red zone. That's why Jerome Ford. Yeah, that's why Jerome Ford is priced at 5.2K, like it's baked in, right? And he gets a pretty favorable matchup, right? Like on the whole, the Steelers are about middle of the road in terms of fantasy points allowed, but they're giving up 4.5 yards per carry to opposing running backs. They're allowing running backs to get over 100 rushing yards per game on average, right? So like being largely overlooked, presumably going to be the focal point of this offense. you can spend 5.2K in much worse ways on this slate. So don't mind having Ford worked in there. I mean, we're going to continue to have this Jalen Warren, Najee Harris conundrum in the
Yeah.
low 5Ks, seemingly for the rest of the season. If you want to go there from a tournament standpoint, it's probably going to continue to be Najee Harris because he's going to continue to be the lesser rostered of the two. So something to keep in mind with that regard. And then, really kind of sprinkling through the rest of this low tier. The only other name of note, and I haven't seen any official word on him, but Khalil Herbert has been practicing in full all week. I haven't seen an announcement that he'll be in or not, but right now at 4.7K and just north of 1% rostership could be a very interesting way to get into the highest game total on the board, that Detroit Chicago game. So one to watch. I'm sure once the announcement comes out, we'll see him jump up pretty considerably in terms of rostership, but rightfully so, right? That price tag is plenty nice, 4.7K.
Yeah, and Deontay Foreman is questionable in this one as well.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so that's the running back position. Thank you, Bob, for taking care of us in the comment section on the back end here. We appreciate that. Again, if you're with us, any questions for your season-longer DFS, shoot them our way. We'll get to them as we go here. We'll post them for everyone to see, and you can discuss. Wide receivers this week. We have, thankfully, Minnesota is not on the main slate, so we don't have to wonder what's going to happen with Justin Jefferson, because that would have been a headache. But we do have several amazing plays up top here, starting at the very top of Tyreek Hill, coming off a bye for a Dolphins team that has an implied total of 30 points. I think the only thing here is, how are you okay with paying more for him than anybody else who maybe arguably have the same, I don't know about the same ceiling, but maybe a better floor, in terms of that kind of thing. I mean, CeeDee Lamb is no joke the last 4 games and is $100 cheaper. So I right now, as a cash player, am spending that extra few $100s for Tyreek Hill and kind of following the rostership, because he is showing right now a good amount more than his expensive counterparts at the top here. I'm trying to find CeeDee Lamb actually to see where he fits in this. Did I cross over him? Yeah, I mean, it's looking to me like, if you're in that 9,200, 9,300 range, people are playing Hill and not Lamb. How are you attacking the upper end of wide receivers here?
Yeah, look, I mean, from a tournament context, you're going to be hard pressed to find almost anybody that has as much upside in a given week as Tyreek Hill, right? So, he'll be in the player pool because of that. In terms of how I'm personally attacking this slate, if these trends hold true, where Tyreek Hill is in kind of the mid to upper teens in terms of rostership, and both Raheem Mostert and Devon Achane are in the low single digits, I'm probably going to get more exposure to the Miami running game, right?
Mm-hmm.
I'm assuming that one of them, namely Devon Achane, when he's officially announced in, is probably going to see that rostership spike up a bit, and that would presumably pull away from Hill's number a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So, if that's the case, then I have no problem rostering and paying up for kind of like a 10 to 12% Tyreek Hill, because that upside is insane. Even in the games where Miami has won comfortably, he's got high 20s, low 30s. He's got a 40 spot in there in games that they ran away with, right? So you don't really have to worry about the game script with him, because a lot of times when they are running away with games, it is largely on the back of his production.
Yeah, and I'm glad you said that, because I've been doing the same thing here, and I've kind of built a lineup where I double leveraged Tyreek Hill with not only playing the Miami running game, but also playing CeeDee Lamb as the expensive wide receiver up top there, which I think is a pretty solid play just to get ahead of that rostership of Tyreek Hill. Because right now, and what we're looking at is, I don't know if you're seeing the same thing on your end, but Tyreek Hill is over 20% and Lamb is
Oh, I
in the
did see
single
that.
digits. So people are paying for Lamb. And just before we get to anything else, I'm putting this trade up here. So thoughts on Olave, Kamara, and Nico Collins for Josh Allen, Jefferson, and Devon, which I assume is Achan. Just lost Joe Burrow last night, so looking for a quarterback. Is that Justin Jefferson? Because
I
please
would
go
think
accept
so.
that. Please go accept that deal right now, right? I mean, is there something that I'm missing there that I shouldn't be missing? I mean, that Olave, Kamara, and Nico Collins is solid, but I that looks like a no-brainer to accept for me.
Yeah, we have confirmation that is Justin Jefferson, and I'll,
Yes,
I'll
I
agree.
see
This
that.
is
Yeah.
this is one to go press the button on, right? Um, you know, always like getting the best player in the deal, which you're doing with Justin Jefferson and maybe to a lesser extent Devon Chan. If nothing
Right.
else, you're getting some of the best upside on in the deal with Achan. And so many times, like we talked about off the top, there's these kind of opportunistic trade offers that come your way when you lose a player like Joe Burrow. This is not that, right? You're getting Josh
Oh
Allen
yeah.
and defendably one of, if not the best wide receiver in the game. So definitely would go click that one pretty quickly.
Yeah, Josh Allen is the QB1 in fantasy
Yeah.
right now. I understand that the Bills are, under the microscope right now for their win-loss, and how they're managing things. But yeah, you're getting the best quarterback in the league right now. Yes, absolutely do that deal. All right, so moving along here a little bit more in the wide receiver game. Anyone else before we go to the mid tier that you like at the top end? I think Cooper Kupp at 8,100 is really really intriguing to me. Matthew Stafford is back, and usually when Stafford is back, Kupp is aligned with those top wideouts, and he's not showing really rostership at 8,100 either. So what's your take on him?
Yeah, I like it a lot, right? Most people saw the kind of up and down results, shortly after he returned, being out there with Puka Nacua at the same time. But a lot of that was, with either a limited or without Matt Stafford. So Matt Stafford turning is a huge windfall. Cooper Cup, he's another one of these players. Like anytime he's in the single digits, I'm going to be very tempted to go overweight because he can crack a slate wide open. Looking at the rest of this top tier, we talked about CD Lamb. Not going out of my way for Diggs, not going out of my way for Devontae Adams. They both have very tough individual matchups.
Mhm.
It's laughable that Adam Thielen is still 7.5K. Jalen Waddle as the leverage off of Tyreek Hill, right? That's something to monitor in terms
Yep.
of his rostership. If he stays around, kind of a little less than half in terms of the comparison to Hill, he'll be one that I'll have a pretty fair share amount of as well.
Yeah, I think he's like the quintessential GPP player too. Like, he could
Yeah,
break the slate and he could bottom out. But I mean, it does bear mentioning that Waddle and Hill are the entire passing game for Miami. They don't use anybody else. So yeah, Waddle is definitely the pivot off of Hill there, and an intriguing one to me for sure. Um, so moving down into the mid tier, there's some guys to like here for me for cash. You mentioned earlier when you were talking about Trevor Lawrence, Christian Kirk, I think is a really, really nice play at 6,000. I don't really understand why he continues to not get priced up. He had 11 targets, went 6 for 104 against the 49ers, pretty much in a game where Jacksonville had no success offensively. So that's significant. He passed Evan Engram for the team lead in targets. I do like Engram this week too, and in receiving yards, and in receiving touchdowns as well. So, Tennessee's secondary is very beatable. So I'm definitely into Christian Kirk at 6,000 for as a cash play. Um, and Tank Dell at 5,900. I love this week. He's got 25 targets over the last 2 weeks. He should not be 5,900. Yes, I know the Texans get Nico Collins back this week, but they also lose Noah Brown, who has been the wide receiver 3 the last 2 weeks, which is insane. And you're the Texans fan too. You got to be excited about Dell, right? I mean, he's something I didn't see coming for this football season.
Yeah, I mean, you over the moon, right? In terms of how this entire draft class is performing, right?
Yeah, right.
You
I mean, I
know,
guess you're over the moon over your quarterback more than anything.
yeah, yeah. I mean, like you know, if you want to gripe about Will Anderson and trading that much capital to to acquire him, fine. But as we continue to win, including this week, that capital that we sent out the door gets a little less valuable, right? So, yeah, I mean, look, the
Right.
thing with Tank Dell is that those that are close to to the Texans have known the amount that CJ Stroud advocated for him to come in and just how quickly they showed that connection in camp. I mean, I'd be lying if I said that anyone thought it would be to this level this quickly, but the promise was there, and it's obviously super exciting to see it materialize.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you got to be thrilled. I mean, things have not been going your way for a while, and it's
Yeah,
it's
it's been
it's a
rough.
light. It's a light at the end of the tunnel, and I'll tell you, I don't think Jacksonville is a shoe in to win that division. I think Houston can give them a run. I think they'll be there at the end. If they don't win it, you at least got some positive stuff to look forward to there.
Absolutely.
So we got a few interesting questions in the chat here. Before we do that, some other mid-tier wide receivers that you're looking at for GPP contests?
Yeah, I mean, for me, as much as I love Tank Dell as a Texans fan, love him as a player. Love the fact that DK is just dug in on not increasing his price. I have no idea why he's sub 6K. Where I'm going from a tournament context is the direct pivot over to the aforementioned Nico Collins, 6.7K. He gets that juicy Marco Wilson matchup that we've been attacking all year, right? Wilson's allowing like an 80% catch rate, about 15 yards per reception, and just hemorrhaging yards after catch, right? And that is very much so Nico Collins' specialty, right? Like those ceiling games that he's put up, they've all come against inferior cornerback coverage, and they have all largely been buoyed by his performance after the catch. So this one sets up beautifully. He's going to be on about 1/3 as many rosters as Tank Dell.
Mm-hmm.
So he is a huge priority for me in terms of tournament context. Beyond that, guys that I think we can kind of sprinkle in here and there, right? I mentioned some interest in Lawrence, so that's going to put me in the Christian Kirk market. Terry McLaurin, another guy whose price tag they refuse to move up, so don't mind going to him at 5.8K. There's some interest in the Tampa Bay receivers because I think they're going to be throwing a fair amount, especially a 2% rostered Chris Godwin. If he stays in that sub 5% range, someone that I think you can definitely get some leverage on the field with. And really the last name in here, to a certain extent, I like how this week sets up for Deebo Samuel. He certainly stepped back into kind of that Deebo role that we knew him to have in that last game. I like that to continue this week. Going to be fairly reasonable in terms of his rostership as well at kind of the high single digits. So that's largely where I'm looking here in this mid tier.
Yeah, I like all those plays too, and we're going to see a couple of those names in our questions here too. So that's a nice player pool to pick from. I think you highlighted the upside very well. So here's one from Jackson Taylor. Pick 3 to start this week in full PPR. I was looking at this, by the way, before you started talking about that, so I kind of have my answer already. I'm curious if you have the same. Puka, Hollywood Brown, DK Metcalf, DJ Moore, Javonte Williams, or Ty Chandler. It's a good list. I mean, that's you're benching some solid names there if you can only start 3 of those 6. But I do have my 3. What's yours?
Oh man, this is a fairly strong list. I haven't seen Alexander Madison be ruled out yet. I know that I saw him practicing through yesterday. So for now, I'll rule out Ty Chandler, assuming that the workload is not his. Of the remaining guys, DK Metcalf is definitely in there for me. Javonte Williams is definitely in there for me. How much do I want to invest in the Bears passing game? I I think I'll go with the safer play, which for me is probably going to be Puka Nakua. So
We got the
Puka,
same three.
DK, and Javante. All right, is where I would go.
We got the same three. Yes, I was wondering the last between. I like Hollywood Brown too, by the way.
Yeah.
But yeah, nope. I got the same three there: Javante,
All
Puka,
right.
and Metcalf. And I'll say, the only thing that I'll say that I might have a different take than you is, you were kind of bouncing. You seem like you'll consider Ty Chandler if Madison is ruled out in this list. I don't. He's far last on this list for me. Um, I don't think he's worth being on this list without Madison if Madison is out. So yeah, we're in lockstep there for you. Javante, Metcalf, and Puka. Thanks for that question. And here is another one from Jeff, one of my favorites on Twitter. Thanks, Jeff, for joining us. We appreciate it. Little open-ended of a question. It's a good question. How should you move forward with Chase in redraft if you're a contender? Yeah, this I answered somebody else on this earlier. I think, I think the fact that I think it's okay, that Browning will have a week to prepare with Chase, so it'll be better than the last week. And Chase is still going to be someone that you want in your lineups, but I do think without Burrow, he's not a wide receiver 1 anymore. He's a wide receiver 2 for sure. Maybe if you want to be super pessimistic about it, which I understand, he's a low wide receiver 2. I think if you can still sell him like he's a top tier wide receiver, you should. What's your thoughts on Chase going forward here?
That is almost the identical read that I have. And while I was live on the In Between Media Fantasy Football podcast earlier today, is when the Joe Burrow news broke, and the entirety of the remaining part of the show was answering basically Jamar Chase trade value questions.
Oh yeah,
right? And for me, the rest of season rankings for him, I've got him now at number 15. Overall. So, kind of in the middle of that wide receiver 2-pack. I doubt that you can get, even close to full compensation for him in the trade market. Maybe if it's a keeper league or something of that effect. But yeah, for me, you can get 75, 80 cents on the dollar. I'm probably taking a long, hard look at that kind of deal.
yeah. I would definitely say, Jeff, float those offers around. I mean, somebody's going to want him. See what the best thing you're going to get. Offer him to every team that might be wide receiver heavy, and see what they're willing to give you there. And if you can't get it done, he's fine. He's just not. He's not a first round. He's not a first round pick anymore. Without Burrow, though, that's all we'll say. Thank you for that question. All right, so we're starting to run a little bit over here. So let's kind of get to the bottom end of the wide receivers and quickly touch on the tight ends here before we wrap it up. So for the cheap end in cash, I'm basically living in the Arizona Cardinals wide receiver room. We had the aforementioned Marquise Brown in the last question. I do think it was a little disconcerting that Kyler Murray dropped back 32 times and Brown only got 3 targets. So, you have a little bit of an inside info, reads on the Texans secondary here. I know the Falcons played him very well. You can maybe tell us if the Texans can have that same success. But at 5,300, I'm fine playing Marquise Brown in cash. And I'm also fine playing either of the 3K players. Michael Wilson is 3,400. Rondale Moore is 3,000. Moore got 8 targets last week with Kyler Murray back. That's not someone who should be $3,000. So I think that's a beautiful cash play at 3,000, which will allow you to get, Tyreek Hill or CeeDee Lamb, maybe an expensive running back, maybe pay up at quarterback if that's your thing this week, maybe even 2 expensive wide receivers. But yeah, that Cardinals receiver room is great for cash. And then Robert Woods, I think is in play on the other side of this game as well, with Noah Brown going down at 3,700. I think you can play him as part of this thing. So that's kind of if I'm looking for cash, cheap cash plays, I'm going to this game. Who are some of your cheap plays that you have?
Yeah, look, it largely rotates around a lot of the same guys that you talked about. because they're going to be a bit more popular, you have to be mindful of how you manage your overall rostership in your build. This on paper at least, this should be a fairly tough matchup for Cardinals receivers. The exception to that being, Derek Stingley returned in that last game and looked a little bit rusty. Right, he was rung up for that touchdown towards the end of the game. He had about a 67% catch rate. So, if he needs to shake the cobwebs off a little bit, that could create some opportunities. But when this Texans secondary is at full strength, it's a very solid unit. So it's something to keep in mind when you're rostering your Cardinals from the tournament context. Michael Wilson, I see him, being fairly overlooked relative to his other Cardinal peers, so he's the priority. Calvin Ridley, a guy that is, as recently as week 1 of this year, the best wide receiver of all time, and now has fallen all the way down to the low 5K range. He is the beneficiary of that Tennessee secondary that allows a ton of chunk plays. So don't mind him at all. Like Jahan Dotson at 5.6K, he's getting your beloved Giant secondary, which are allowing opposing wide receivers to do largely whatever they want. I don't mind going to Deontay Johnson. He's 5K flat. He's going to be in the low single digits. Yes, he's coming off of that down game, but prior to that point, in the mid to high teens, pretty much every week since returning. I think last week was the aberration. It is a tough matchup, but to pay off 5K, there are just so many ways for Deontay Johnson to get there. And then this is, only for the largest of fields. Jackson Smith and Jigba has been coming on more and more lately, right? Like the book on Seattle for the longest time was they have their 2 receivers. That's who's going to run the entirety of their snaps and their routes. If a third guy's out there, he's certainly not getting any targets. But week over week, JSN has really been getting more and more involved. I like this game between the Seahawks and the Rams to put up some points. So he might be an interesting way to get into that game without having to absorb a ton of rostership, right? So, those are the guys that really jump out to me from a tournament context.
Yeah, I like that call, and it kind of goes in line with Seattle using 12 personnel a little bit less than they have.
Mm-hmm.
That was my biggest worry of JSN, getting drafted there too, because they use 12 personnel at such a high rate that the third receiver just gets lost there. But they have been doing it less, and like you said, he's been showing more of a higher snap share and catch rate as a result. So I like that call a lot, actually. All right, so let's quickly get to the tight ends before we get out of here. We got a few minutes left. The way it's looking for cash is, unless something opens up, it looks like, well over half of the field is either doing Trey McBride at 4,400 or Evan Engram at 4,300. I'm fine with whichever one you want to choose. I personally want McBride of the two more. He's got a 32% target share over the last 3 weeks, which is absolutely elite. And he carried that right over with Kyler Murray. 9 targets for an 8-catch, 131-yard game last week. So he's the way I'm going if I'm choosing one of these two. If you don't want, the one problem you might run into is I did just say that I'm also living in the Arizona wide receiver room for cash as well. So if maybe you don't want like a Cardinals stack in cash, if you're not totally comfortable with that, I'm okay going to Engram. But I also don't think a Cardinals stack in cash is a bad thing. It's not Clayton Tune running the Cardinals anymore. So those are the two that I'm looking at for cash. I guess Cole Kmet is also viable if you need that extra couple of $100 at 4,100, but I think you got to go to these two in cash. So why don't you give us your thoughts on those two, maybe in the GPP context, and any other plays you're looking at?
Yeah, look, I mean, it's hard to navigate around that type of rostership, especially at a onesie position that typically doesn't have quite as much upside, right? We can point back to McBride's game last week and immediately squash that point, but it's a 1 game sample size. If this trend holds, fantastic, right? You know, there's a top 5 tight end down the stretch run, but you know, it really puts you in a tough spot in terms of, you know, a very overexposed build going with either of these guys. But they're fine plays on merit. They should be in the cash pool. You know, for me, tight end is kind of ugly this week. Probably my favorite play. You know, on the whole, he's a little bit more expensive than I would want him to be, but I love how this game sets up for Sam Laporta at 5.8K. You know, he's not drawing a ton of rostership because of that price tag, and his, you know, his matchup against the Bears is phenomenal. They're, you know, 4th in the league in fantasy points allowed per game to opposing tight ends. They allow the highest catch rate to tight ends on the season, 82%. So basically everything that's going Laporta's way, you know, has a good chance of being hauled in. And again, another, you know, kind of unique way to get into a very desirable game script and very popular game overall. So Laporta's probably my favorite on the board. You know, after that, I mean, you can get into some of these salary savers. If Pat Freiermuth ends up playing, you know, all the way down at 2.5K, don't mind that at all. But you're going to be limited from an upside standpoint. That's really, you know, for the purpose of getting salary relief. But there's a place for that. So those are probably the two biggest priorities that I have in the tournament context, outside of the, you know, the fairly strong plays that you mentioned with regard to cash.
I didn't even realize he was that cheap. I kind of glossed right over him. Fryermuth at mid price. I mean, you know, I think your take on it was spot on, but I'll pencil that one in.
Yeah.
You know, that guy of his caliber of tight end at mid price is definitely worth at least looking at. I'll throw one more out there too. I do like Tyler Conklin. If you're looking for another one of those sub 3K guys there, you know, since Matt Milano was injured for the Bills, they're not the same matchup for tight ends. And he's got 13 catches over the last 2 weeks and is 2,900. I mean, the only problem there, I think, with using him in the cash setting is that, like I said, those two are soaking up so much rostership. Mm-hmm. It's almost like it's forcing you to go that way. And I think you probably should in that context. But I definitely like your thoughts on the GPP pivots, which are, you know, showing the floor and ceiling at way less rostership as well. All right. So that is going to do it for us for this week. We will be in touch via Twitter on how we're going to handle next week with the Thanksgiving slate and everything. But you should definitely see us and follow the Football Diehards page and check that out. You know, updates are posted on the homepage all the time. You can follow me on Twitter at JAC3600. I'm always on there, especially during the football season, doing DFS stuff. Eric, what are we looking at for you right now as far as work?
Yeah, so definitely going to be spending a lot of time getting geared up for, I think it's like football in 5 out of the subsequent 6 days over the course of the holiday break. You know, these shorter slates are always end up being a ton of fun, and coinciding with that is all of the holiday tournaments in college basketball, which we are breaking down in full detail over on YouTube at Green Screens Media. Open up another tab and check out what we're doing over there. We've started off the season white hot. Our core fours are hitting 5, 6, 7x value. Prize Picks has been killing it. Our betting lines have been killing it. I mean, it's been a fantastic start to the season. Would love it if you checked us out at Green Screens Media and rode along with us on this train.
Awesome. Absolutely. Yeah. Go over there. Check that out. Especially if you're into betting, they're taking care of you guys over there. I am going to start doing that myself because, like I said, I'm getting into the college basketball betting again as the season gets underway here. So I'll be hitting you up for that. Thank you, everybody that joined us in the chat and for bringing your questions. We appreciate every single one of you listening to us babble on about DFS for an hour every week. We couldn't do it without you, so we appreciate it. If we don't, you know, we don't see you before the Thanksgiving, we won't see you before the Thanksgiving. So everybody have a great Thanksgiving, safe holiday with your families. Look for us on the air talking about the Sunday slate following Thanksgiving, and definitely go listen to Bob and Mike on SiriusXM Fantasy and SiriusXM NFL Radio, who are doing a great job with the Football Diehards show every Friday and Saturday night. All right, that is going to do it for us. For Eric, I'm Jamie. We will see you next week. Take it easy.